Hello everyone. Today I'm starting my video series where I'm going to be criticizing some online conquest guides. So let's just start by looking up RuneScape conquest strategies. Skimmed through these beforehand, but we're going to look at them in depth today. And I'm also going to be breaking these down into the different sections you see, the different sets. So this video we're just looking at the basic guidelines. These will be shorter videos than what I usually put out. So let's see. Using ranged unit. Already we've got a problem. They didn't make that plural. Such as archers and mages. You know, not archers or mages, but and. Is not advised unless. Well, I don't think there is any unless. But yeah, it's at least nice to have a plan, like if you want to protect them from scout charges until the end game. Again, not. I would say that plan doesn't really work out. I mean, generally, people still have tons of scouts in the end game. You know, at least one or two. So even in the end game, they will very well still get charged. I would say they're no better than a halberd, and that's pretty weird considering that they cost more. You know, with the halberd, at least you have to use charge and battle cry, but with a major archer, all you have to do is use charge. Let's see, or sacrifice them for a gambit. It's pretty much impossible to do that. Maybe it is against very specific sets, but at least for the general case or like versus anti-rush, that's not really going to work out just because they're worth 100 whole points. And that's really too much just to be giving your opponent and to be wasting not having in your own army. I mean, you could have a halberd and then you could like upgrade a scout into a foot soldier or a foot soldier into another halberd. So I would say overall the gambit's probably not going to be worth it. Even if you do end up getting to attack, you still have less material initially. Or for a future attack, which is kind of redundant because that was already said over here, protect them from scouts. That really is the whole future attack thing. But anyways, I would say not advised at all. Just get rid of this unless. So while Vigilance may seem like a very useful command, let's see. It looks like they're trying to throw some shade at me right now. Players new to Conquest should be made aware of its plentiful drawbacks. I sort of agree that new players shouldn't use Vigilance because a lot of times I don't think they see how it works. I think it takes a bit of understanding of the game, the different mechanics, the different tactics, to, I think, fully appreciate Vigilance as a command. I would say it's a tactical command rather than like an offensive or a defensive one. So you have, you know, others like Shield Wall, Stoicism. You can use those, you know, to push forward and be aggressive, right? That's pretty straightforward. But Vigilance isn't like that. You can't just use it to push forward. So let's actually go through these counters and we'll sort of discuss that. Also, there's putting two spaces in this paragraph only per sentence. It's only these two over here. Like over here, they don't do it. Over here, they don't put two spaces. It very much bothers me. Two spaces used to be the standard when we still had typewriters and every character was the same space. So you needed some extra space to show that there was like actually a gap, and that it was a new sentence. But you know, these days, font sizes take care of that. But anyways, back on topic. It can be countered by a longer range unit. Battle Cry, Stoicism, Bombard, Regeneration. So basically, longer ranged units and pretty much every command, it looks like. Now, I'm going to only agree with this to an extent. If your unit is all alone and he doesn't have any sort of backup, you don't have any sort of plan to recapture or counterattack, I'm going to say that, yeah, all of these are obviously going to be vigilance. But you have to think about how your units are going to work together, how these things are going to change the flow of the battle. Right? So with the longer ranged unit, we're just going to say halberds because nobody's going to use archers or mages. So it can be countered by a longer range unit. Well, maybe you kind of want them to use a longer range unit. Like, let's say you have a champion over at their base, and they've still got some halberds, I guess. You sort of have two options. You can let them hit your champion with theirs, or you can get hit with the halberd. And the halberd obviously is going to deal less damage. So maybe if your champion is at like a lower HP, maybe 400, maybe even 500 would still work. If they're threatening to use battle cry, and we'll look at battle cry in a second. But if you can get them to attack you with that halberd, that's going to do less damage, and ultimately that means your champion's going to survive maybe just a turn longer. But, you know, that's all you need to do a lot of damage, is just a single turn to take another unit. So, battle cry and stoicism, only to an extent are they going to counter, right? So, you do get the extra health from these. However, some of that extra health is going to be knocked off by your unit that had used vigilance. So, let's say, for example, let's just keep going with the champion example that's at their base. Perhaps you can use vigilance, and if they want to use battle cry to attack your champion and kill him, well, their champion's going to be lower to 300 HP now. And I think that's pretty good all on its own, maybe, sort of, depending on the situation. You can finish them off with a scout charge battle cry maybe later, or maybe you have a scout already up on the front lines that can do it now. So you can immediately get that recapture. And stoicism, let's say this time you're defending your champions, and you use vigilance on one, and they attack you with stoicism on. Even if they kill your champion, they basically don't have stoicism anymore. So if you have a champion, you can actually use it to kill theirs now, or maybe if their champion was weakened already, you can finish it off with something else. But it's gonna knock off some HP from these, so it's almost like they don't have it after their turn. So Bombard is only going to work for the 100 HP units. Regeneration, well, again, I would say this only counters it to an extent. The way I see it is that you were trading something, like maybe scouts, and then you used vigilance. And I guess they had two options at that point. Their options were use chastise, and with chastise you could potentially move something else up to attack. Maybe you would end up getting their halberd, and they wouldn't like that. And their other option is going to be to actually take the damage with their champion and then regenerate it off later. But the way I see it is you just traded scouts, so that's already equal. And by using vigilance, you basically force them to use regenerate, which costs a lot more. It costs 150 whole command points. And your vigilance only costs 50, so you can use it plenty of times. And yeah, to some extent, is going to be shield wall. As nearly every single setup will have multiple counters to vigilance, it will only be useful in a few instances. Well, I kind of disagree. If you watch my videos, I find vigilance is usually pretty useful in a lot of places. Overall, it's going to stop them from making certain moves just because they know you have vigilance. But really, that's going to be with every command. There are going to be certain limitations to certain moves with all commands, but I think Vigilance is such a complex command. So maybe it's harder for them to see ahead or to calculate out what you might do with Vigilance. Because I find that most of the other commands are pretty straightforward. Right? Battle Cry, Charge, you want to save those to kill expensive units, halberds, champions. Stoicism can be used to defend a unit, whether they're at your base or you're going to theirs. Bombard, obviously, you want to stall. Regenerate, well, obviously, you're soaking up damage with champions. But I think Vigilance, it's not very clear what you're doing with Vigilance. I think maybe the goal is to be up in material. So you're going to be up in material both at the beginning, just because it's a slightly cheaper command. You can get like an extra foot soldier. And maybe throughout the game, maybe you can force them to make bad trades with you by having Vigilance. Although, I don't know. Maybe that's not the case. You know, I've done videos on that. It doesn't seem forced, at least from my experiences. So let's see. While there are different types of formation, not formations, just formation. The most common effective one is corner. Not the corner, just corner. I also don't like that they say corner because I've tried telling people to use a corner formation. And, you know, I would tell them, like, my formation as an example. Right? So it's more like a wall instead of a corner. Because you've got a wall, and it's obviously going to be next to the corner, because you're trying to prevent units from getting in. So, trying to prevent them from getting in. So you build a wall or a sort of a curtain, maybe. You put your cheap units in the front, the ones you want to get into the attack, those go in the front, and the ones you want to protect, save for later, those go in the back. Those are your protected units. And, you know, as the game goes on, your wall kind of gets smaller. But as the game goes on, you sort of have less... You should have less important pieces to protect. So setting up your formation in the corner increases your defensive potential without sacrificing your offensive potential. Well, as it's about to tell us in a minute, it can potentially... be detrimental to our defense. But yeah, I made a video about this. It's all about the corner movement system. It's my video is called a conquest puzzle and like conquest puzzle solutions. And in there I explain how the movement system works. So you can check that out. It actually makes for some interesting tactics. I will say. I played a game recently that I'll upload soon enough where I use some of these tactics in my game, actually. So keep in mind while using a wall, not corner, a corner setup, it can be a death trap for your units if you cannot evade an attack or counterattack. So, yeah, if your units are all in one spot and there's no way to escape, that might be pretty bad. So instead, you can also consider a central formation, which can be used offensively and defensively. But it's going to be a lot easier to make mistakes with the central formation, like troop positioning, responding correctly to opponents' attacks. There's definitely a lot of mistakes to be made with a corner formation, even with just the initial setup. Your champions have to be like exactly 6 squares away from each other. So if they capture one, they can't capture the other. Like same with the halberd, 6 spaces away. Or maybe it's more just because of scouts. I don't quite remember, but they have to be far enough away. And there is some math to it. I try to incorporate some math into my sets. At least if I'm trying to invent a new set, one that's not standard like rush or anti-rush. So for example, my vigilance set, I've got 4 scouts, And that's simply because if we trade 4 units, they can't really hide their champions in their wall anymore. So that's one thing about the corner setup. Can become a death trap when you've got all your units in the same place. And it says here it allows you to send all your units into the attack because they're on the front line. You don't necessarily need a central formation to do that, but you probably would. However, that's going to be a double-edged sword. So if all of your units are close enough to attack all of theirs, as quickly as possible, that means all of their units are basically in range to attack all of yours. So yeah, that one really goes both ways. And most of the time, it's best to have 10 units and 4 commands. I think this is the only bullet that I don't have any qualms with. Although it would be interesting to see a set with fewer units, like maybe just 9, just because if you trade equally, maybe you get a chastise advantage. Although that's really difficult to do because champion and scout versus champion is a win for the scout side. So I don't really think that would work out, but it's a fun thought. I will admit there are some decent-ish sets that don't have 10 units, like the Championeer set. It's 3 champions and like 2 scouts with regenerate. So I'll admit it's a pretty decent set. It can definitely squash your average player, maybe even your average tournament player, from what I've seen. But yeah, I think that does it for this video. So just to recap, I would get rid of this unless for the ranged units. I think Vigilance is a tactical command that you sort of theorize about once you're in the I guess higher levels of competitive play. I would call it the wall formation, not the corner, and no problem with this bullet. So that is it for this video. Join me next time. We're going to look at the rush set.